And now I know, a lot of people do not have the time or don't have the resources or don't have 5 other people to include in an interview process, or think, hey, I know exactly what I need. I don't need anybody else to move in there. But I can only recommend to think about who could potentially be supportive in the interview process.
Hey there, welcome on into Layers LCG. I'm your host, Zane Inglis. Great to have a very special guest here today, Mr. Carsten Grueber, country head for New Zealand for TikTok. Welcome aboard, Carsten. Great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Zane. Excited to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure. We've had some really interesting discussions over the past 6 months since we first connected. And I was really intrigued by, you have a very interesting and unique background there and have, vast experience in a lot of large international companies, particularly in leadership and fast-growing companies. So I thought it'd be great to get you on today and share some insights onto how, you've gone about developing your leadership skills and how you're actually doing really well here in New Zealand in another unique position. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks again.
So before I jump into the the nitty gritty, it's always good to get a bit of a background. Where you originally from and where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I'm German. My father was half Swiss, half German. My mother is from Algeria, but I grew up quite internationally, right? So I grew up in Japan, Egypt, Jamaica, France, obviously in Germany a few years. I changed schools 7 times until I got my high school diploma in a boarding school in Germany. So a lot of traveling in my very young years. That was related obviously to the jobs of my parents. And that obviously also had an impact of who I am today, and how I planned my life in later years. Right, so I've also worked in 15 to 20 countries around the globe, with some exciting destinations like in sub-Saharan Africa, in the Congo, Ghana, Uganda, Iceland, some of the places where you don't usually put them on your bucket list, kind of like travel places, or where you would travel as a tourist in the first place. So that's just a little bit of my background in the younger years. And studies was in Germany, the UK, and the United States, right? So a little bit all over the place in my, first 25 to 30 years of my life.
It's interesting because you often find kids who move a lot in their very young youth, they're either very extroverted or very introverted, because they might struggle to make friends, or, they're constantly having to make new friends and fit in new environments. And seeing how, outgoing and, I wouldn't call you necessarily extrovert, but, it gives me a lot of faith because my kids have moved a lot over the years too, not to quite so many countries as yourself. But how would you describe yourself, going back to your, maybe before you were 10 years old? Were you an outgoing kid or were you introverted with all those moves?
I actually, no, I would rather say outgoing. I mean, luckily, with all the changes, right? So every time you obviously change schools, you kind of like, you don't reinvent yourself, but you have to, make friends again and again at an early age. And I, in hindsight, thinking back, I never had too much trouble with that, right? So I was never too challenged by making new connections. And I actually got very excited every time, we kind of like knew in 6 months from now, we're going to basically pack up the whole house. And then, we're moving to Egypt now, right? So I felt like this was, quite an adventure every time. And, in hindsight, we just made that move from Berlin to Auckland. I mean, I look at my parents and I think of my parents having done that so many times in their lives. And I'm just like completely in awe, right? Because it's moving a family is quite a big thing. You're not just moving yourself. You're moving a lot of characters, and all of that has to be managed. And in some cases, it is more challenging than in other cases. But anyway, for me as a young kid, I really loved it. I really enjoyed it, and I have so many positive memories from that very international upbringing.
I guess that really helps you, or has helped you succeed in these global companies you've worked in over the years, because, various different countries where those companies are based, but obviously very diverse employee bases. So before we get into today, where you are today or where you've sort of ended up in your career, what was your dream job when you were growing up, sort of, early years of high school? Where did you think you would end up?
I think so a business kind of marketing kind of environment that I felt that was there from an early stage. However, now that I say that, it's actually not quite true. So because of the lifestyle we had at an early stage, I had at an early stage, and the moving around and so forth. And we, every time you come to a new country, you kind of like you stay in a hotel for a while. And I was really fascinated, by hotels, how they worked and how they functioned, and how you make this place your home for a while, and then you move out again, and the support you get there, the service level of service, and all these kind of things, right? So as a matter of fact, briefly after high school, I went through a what we call in Germany like an apprenticeship, and I went through a training in a hotel,
Wow.
which was about 2.5 to 3 years, and my thought was, I'm going to go through that practical training after high school, and you really go through all the departments, from sales to housekeeping to the restaurant, right? Like doing pretty much everything that needs to be done in a hotel. And then I thought afterwards, so that was the baseline. I wanted to go to a hotel management school, either in Switzerland or the US. So that was the plan. But that training of 2.5 to 3 years put me off so much that I said, in the future, I only want to be a guest in a hotel, right? So yes, the marketing bit, came potentially, was there already slumbering in me, but that was really fine tuned at a later stage, because right after that training program, I went off to do a bachelor in marketing, and then after working a few years practically in businesses, I added an MBA, which was at the time sponsored by Deutsche Telekom, by T Online. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we all have dreams. Mine was to be a bricklayer. Luckily, after 6 months, my company I was working with went bankrupt, and that stopped. It wasn't all it was cracked up to be. But it's interesting. Like, it sounds like you had a little bit of an evolution there. What sort of took you into the tech industry or the communications industry back in the day?
So I think one of my first job was working for an internet consultancy, and it was a startup during the big bubble around the 2000s, and the company was called Blue Sea. And it had a very, very strong and very, very brief IPO, stock going up, way up, and then it crashed incredibly. After the investor expectation was that we expand very quickly into various very expensive markets, and the company, abided by it and opened up offices. I mean, in all sorts of places. I was part of office opening in London, and the company was investing into US market, and it was again. So the idea around that was good, and supporting old economy in their transition into the leveraging the internet and processes and so forth. So it was the right idea. but it didn't work out so well for that company, right? So it was a fairly short ride. I think it was about 1.5 to 2 years. But it certainly really ignited my interest, and I knew that this is the field where I want to say settle, because you never know where you settle, but that is the field I'm aspiring to, and I do not want to go into something which is not very strongly connected, with that. And following that, I worked in various really classic media sales position, right, where I worked for a company that had contracts with all sorts of international media outlets, and we were kind of like resellers. So during that time, within a period of about 3 years, I worked in 15 countries. So not every few years, every 3 to 4 months, I was put on a different project, right? And again, this was, what I described, having worked in sub-Saharan Africa. I worked in various countries that I've never thought I'm going to visit. And that, again, the focus was around setting up businesses very quickly, and making connections very quickly, leading interviews, but also doing media sales and getting financial support for these kind of like projects, and then moving out of the market again. And usually the teams I worked in were 3 to 4 people. It was a new team every time, usually from different countries. So would have to get close together very quickly, understand the market very quickly, and have an impact, and then move out into the next market. Right? So that was not really connected too much to anything internet related, because it was really classic sales in print. However, the move that came later, working for Deutsche Telekom and getting my MBA sponsored from them, was again setting me up for a successful application at Google at the time. Right, it was around 2007, and I worked for that company in various sales positions, and also different offices for around about 9 years.
Wow. So you've been through a couple of the big tech companies that we'd associate with social media. And how long have you been with the team at TikTok now?
So the team this team for just over a year and 2 months. But I've been with TikTok I'm in my 4th year now. I'm in my 4th year, 3rd job in the company, 3rd team, 3rd manager I'm reporting into. I mean, I don't know. I've been leading a life of change, and it's not changing, and I'm enjoying it, right? I mean, one of our daughters is diagnosed with ADHD, and you may know that this often is passed on from parents or a parent. And when I first looked at that test she had to go through, and I looked at those questions, I thought, my God, a lot of these things very much apply to me. So I think me making these many moves from a young age, and me potentially having difficulties and doing the same thing for too much of a time, put me into places where I like to see change. I enjoy change, and I like it's potentially also a reason why I like fast-paced environments, right? Because in fast-paced environments, you get challenged differently all the time, and that is probably the kind of environment I enjoy being. But it's also the environment where I still get to grow, right?
I think that's interesting, actually, because it's kind of one of the things working with leaders who perhaps don't have myself discovering at 40-something years old that I had dyslexia through the same process, getting my son tested, and being told that it's very much hereditary and my traits are very much aligned with his. So thinking that your kind of normal and what is normal, but coming up and then becoming a manager with ADHD or something like dyslexia, which allows us to look at the world in a different way, and seeing people who don't move as quickly, because I'm very similar to you. I like a dynamic environment. I've changed a lot, so it's probably ADHD behind me somewhere as well. But it's often been challenging when you have employees who are not so keen to embrace change, or they want a lot more structure than you have, and you feel like you're the normal one, and it's hard to empathize with them. How were you when you first realized that perhaps you weren't the normal one, in your willingness to constantly change and be in diverse environments?
Yeah. So again, I mean, I'm not diagnosed officially. It's just
Myself.
something I think. Again, so the impact of if you are young and you are moving. You're changing countries on a constant basis. You have to adapt to the environment. You make new friends. You potentially also learn a new language. Um, I mean, these are impactful things from a young age, right? Um, the the choices of companies that I've made, maybe subconsciously, right? I mean, it looks like I'm just chasing big tech when you look at my CV, but in reality is that I'm drawn to multinational, international kind of environments, right? Because I think this is one of my strengths, is that I'm adaptable. I'm adaptable to new environments. I enjoy change, an ever-changing environment. So I've automatically been drawn to that. And during how do I support people that are maybe more challenged by that? I mean, first of all, I make it very clear what kind of environment TikTok is, right? Or, pending on, if I work for a different company, during interview processes, I'm brutally honest with the environment that, people are applying to. And I talk about the good, and I talk about the bad, the challenging bits, right? And I make it as clear as possible, because in an early interview process, potentially people are interviewing for more than one job, and then maybe they notice, okay, I got a little hint of something which I don't like too much. Maybe I rather go into the other direction, which is completely fine, right? I rather have early decisions than having a challenging, phasing out, managing out somebody of a company or of a job, which is always a challenging phase for everyone involved, right? So I try to be as honest about the environment, and let people really think about whether that's the right one for them, right? And I'm also very clear about the expertise we need, and nobody knows everything from the get-go, but I'm kind of like looking for the willingness to learn, and the willingness to adapt in an ever-changing environment, whether people are up for it, and have the baseline of succeeding in such an environment, or maybe not, right?
It's interesting, I guess. You started out your career in a place like Deutsche Telekom, which was probably a much older, more established company with potentially less chaos. So in that sort of situation, you're dealing with people who probably weren't looking for that, but being in a communications industry, it may have adapted. But now you'd imagine people who come into companies like Google or TikTok are probably inspired by that kind of environment, or they wouldn't come. So it might be a little bit easier. So I'd like to kind of hone in a little bit here on how you have applied your skills coming into New Zealand. Obviously, you're a global citizen, having lived in probably half of the world. But what unique challenges did you find when you first started to set up the company here in New Zealand? And is there anything you had to adapt in your leadership style to perhaps make the first year and a half a success?
The the way you asked me that question, I had to think about a conversation I had with my wife before coming here, right? She put me down for a heart to heart, right? So she's a Kiwi, right? So that's one of the reasons I'm in New Zealand is because my wife and I made a decision, at some point in the potentially distant past. At some point, we're going to make a move to New Zealand when to ensure that our children have the opportunity to actually grow up into and really ingraining two cultures into their being. And both of us having lived and worked in different countries and industries, I mean, we can see what impact it had on our way of looking at the world. So we wanted to make sure that our kids had that same opportunity. Now, one could think that when you've traveled around and you've worked in different places, your intercultural adaptability is maybe is higher, but a heart-to-heart conversation before you go into a new market and getting as much information about it before you go into the market is always helpful, right? So so maybe I start what it was like for my wife to move to Germany from London many years ago, right? So in 2009, my wife moved there, and there was probably a couple of smaller cultural shocks here and there for her, but the biggest one that she had to really manage, and it was a difficult one, was the absolute and brutal directness of people. Right? So there's not a lot of packaging, right? So if you leave the house and you have a bad hair day and you don't know it, by midday, you will know about it without passing any mirrors, right? People will tell you, and it's not because people are being mean. It's just factual. Your hair looks like shit. Why is that? Why so? There are multiple, in life, in private as well as business settings. There's multiple, situations where you would run into something like this, because again, Germany is pretty direct, right? And I think it has many benefits, right? You often get to the point where you want to get to much quicker. It's less beating around the topic that everybody wants to talk about, but so less packaging. So the heart to heart from my wife to me was basically about communication style, right? And she clearly told me, listen, think of New Zealand when it comes to communication being a little bit more like the UK, right? People are better at packaging things, and when you get a no, you might not quite right away get it that it is a no. So really listen, listen carefully, and don't directly translate what you want to say in German into English, right? And I think that it's. I lived in the UK before, and I've studied there, and I was well aware of that. But it's a good reminder, especially if you work in a very fast-moving kind of company like TikTok, where expectations are very high. You kind of have to adapt your style, and you also have to support people in that kind of environment, right? And support them in a way that it makes sense to them. So yeah, I think for me the culture shock coming to New Zealand was actually not that big at all. At least I think. Maybe other people are going to view it differently. But the amazing thing is that people are extremely welcoming here, right? I mean, and it's the benefit of a smaller market is, of course, that you get to meet people fairly quickly, and people are very actionable, right? What I found and noticed is that when you meet somebody new and you have a connection, nearly every time we get towards the end of that conversation, people would have one or two ideas of who else you should definitely meet, and the next day you would have an email introduction, right? So welcoming plus actionable, makes it a really easy translation into a completely new environment. Where at the beginning of the year, I didn't know much people except my lovely New Zealand family I have here. Yeah.
One of the topics we sort of discussed is previously, you're coming from a very direct culture where you give direct feedback and you receive direct feedback. And having spent 25 years away from New Zealand myself, and in Japan, where you don't give a lot of direct feedback, it's probably the complete extreme. You come back to New Zealand, and I found people generally think that they have a pretty good idea and she'll be right, and they want to figure things out by themselves, and they're not always completely open to constructive criticism or advice. How have you gone about developing that psychological safety within TikTok, where you've got Kiwis who don't necessarily want that direct feedback, but you have to give it to them in order to keep pace with the expectations of head office, and likewise receiving it yourself, I guess, based on the unique nature of the Kiwis you're working with?
Yeah, so the feedback in Germany comes without the buns, right? No packaging, right? No. So I think so. It really starts. I mean, it kind of like starts in the interview process, right? It starts potentially also looking at CVs already and the interview process. If you can see that people have at their core, people want to develop, and you can see it a little bit from a CV. But if you have a good interview conversation with them, you will see signs for have people taken on new projects, or have they been doing the same thing over and over again, right? Have they moved around a little bit, or have they stayed in the same company? And I'm not saying that staying in the same company is a stain, or is nothing to thrive for. People have amazing careers staying with the same company for many years. So many ex-colleagues that are still at Google doing a great job there, and even at Meta. So I'm not saying that, but it's more about the kind of things they've done within those organizations. So that gives me already a little bit of a signal. If somebody is willing to learn new things, then they are probably also more receptive to feedback and receiving feedback as an opportunity to grow, right? The baseline for feedback, I think, is trust, right? So, and when you start with a completely new team going into a completely new market, I mean, I go trust first, right? That's what I do. I go trust first, and then you'll have to disappoint me a couple of times before that is not there anymore, obviously. But a trust first person, and people, there's other people that that need a few months to build trust and that rapport. I go in trust first, and then if things go well, that's brilliant. I lean in even further, and that's wonderful. And when you have that baseline of trust, I think that's when hard conversations are becoming much easier. So the trust as a baseline, and then frequency. So if you get feedback once a year, right? And you're already starting to sweat like a week before that feedback conversation is going to happen, because you're going to feel like it's going to be that either the sandwich or that just a patty without the buns. Then I think that's when it becomes a little bit more difficult, right? But however, if you get a team, a diverse team with willingness to learn at their core, then feedback should be something that they are actually aspiring to. The worst thing I can potentially do as a manager is basically only talk about the good things, and then having a high performer, and I have nothing else to tell him in which direction they can grow. The likelihood that they're going to get bored and then seek the next thrill is very high. So I think even high performers, or specifically high performers, need to find things, where they can see themselves evolving into and growing into and become better versions of themselves, right? Because if not, then it comes down specifically to your paycheck, and the paycheck usually is not enough to keep good people, right? Right. So it's usually, people. I hope that people are coming, to TikTok because they see that there's something new and there's a lot they can learn on the way, and they know it's a fast-paced environment and they know it's a demanding environment. And that's specifically why the reason they chose us, and not only because they feel like it's going pretty well there right now.
I think listening to you, I can see why we've had so many fun discussions, because there are a lot of similarities. But I think the respect and credibility aspect is really important. That I think over the years, of the people I received constructive criticism from who I didn't respect, I didn't listen. But I clearly recall the first manager I genuinely respected, and it pissed me off at first when he gave me the constructive criticism, but I thought, I think this guy is pretty successful, so I'm going to listen. I applied, and then my colleagues and my clients started to recognize the changes, and that made me feel good, so I started to get hungry for it. And I think one technique that I can suggest managers use to gain credibility and respect is to show a little bit of empathy and curiosity, and ask before you tell. Because too often we look from the outside, particularly, being a consultant, I'm constantly coming into new environments, and yourself shifting a lot within the company. You have a lot of experience and you think you see, and more often than not, you're right, but it's always good to ask before you tell. What are you, noticing in this situation? Any ideas why that might be happening, rather than just going to say, hey, Carsten, that's not right, do it this way. And I get the impression that that's something that is important to you, with the curiosity and the empathy.
Yeah, I mean, if something is off, you always have to start with the question. I completely agree, right? Why is something happening, or why is somebody doing that, right? Because maybe they're doing it for very viable, reasons. Maybe they see something which I don't see yet. So start a conversation like that with a question is probably the right thing. It's interesting you said that about the manager giving you feedback. I mean, I one of the best managers I've ever had. I mean, also really really demanding manager, but also somebody who had the ability to to have a really strong baseline of trust within his team. And that person really, I mean, I walk 3 steps towards the door, I would get feedback on 2.5 steps at least, right? And that is sometimes it's sometimes hard, because sometimes you just want to walk towards the door and walk out, right? I mean, or you just want to do a project, and get it done, and get a pat on the back, and well done, without then right away, hearing about the 3 things you can do differently. However, having said that, I've never, I've really grown, and I've really learned so much in that time. I had, the joy of working closely with that person. So that is something I really, and on the other hand, you remember another manager where things were actually good, and I was hitting my target, and it was fairly easy. And that manager always told me, "Yeah, all good. Keep on doing what you're doing." And I clearly remember in that time, where also a great company, well-established company, no worries at all. But I clearly remember that I had this constant underlying feeling of dullness, right? Or potentially not unhappy, right? In that space, right? Because was easy for me to hit the targets. Not a lot of feedback from the manager, so not a lot of growth, right? And I think not growing is really something that makes people uneasy. It certainly makes me uneasy, right, when I'm in that space.
And I think as a young manager, I never received any training. And that was always really frustrating for me because I had the same, constantly wanting to progress. I wanted to deliver more for the company. I wanted them to develop me more. And when I got to a point where I felt like I'd hit the ceiling, I'd just quit and go somewhere else. But not everyone feels like that. And probably in a young company like TikTok in New Zealand, it's probably not the case. But in the past, have you had a case where you've had a team member who does seem to be really comfortable and doesn't want to challenge themselves, but they still have some core essence that makes you want to keep them, where you've actually been able to kind of maybe turn them around and inspire them to be a little bit more open to feedback and more keen to change?
Well, not since I got to New Zealand, right? I mean,
But in previous companies, maybe more established.
Previous companies, right? No, I'm very happy with the team that we were able to able to recruit for New Zealand here at TikTok. But I mean that happens all the time, right? You always have somebody, not always, but there are instances where you would have somebody that is potentially not performing to the level, right? And that's and that is also nothing too unusual, right? Nobody can always perform at a very high standard, right? And then you have to look at it a little bit holistically, right? Is it what is the background behind this? Is there maybe personal challenges outside the business that have an impact on performance? If somebody was performing well, and all of a sudden, there's a slump. I mean, there's all sorts of things that can that can lead to this. And again, right, I'm a big fan. If I see something off, I'm not gonna wait, right? I do not let time pass. I try to highlight this as quickly as possible. Understand what the challenge is, or how the person is challenged. Get a better understanding how I can support, or how the business can support, and then see if we can progress. And if somehow it is not a match, or the move the needle cannot be moved, then we have to think of other ways of moving on, right? And it's just a fact, because in a situation that cannot be improved, nobody is going to get happy, right? It's not fun for the candidate. It's not fun for the for anybody involved, and not for the manager. HR is usually a very neutral kind of like support team in situations like that. Unemotional, they'll support me. Unemotional, they'll support the candidate, and on we go, right? But yes, I mean, these situations come up. I mean, I've been a manager of teams for many years now, so it's nothing too unusual. The best thing you can do to avoid this is to be very much involved in the hiring process, and that starts with the job description. It starts with having long conversations with recruiters, telling them exactly what you want, what you don't want, what is the add-on this new person is bringing to the team. You don't want to have the same. I think it was the worst thing for me would be to manage a team of Carstens. So I think I truly believe that diverse teams, and diversity comes in many forms. I mean, most people think of gender diversity. I mean, there's ethnicity, there is sexual orientation, there's and the more colorful your team is, the more the more effective and the better that team is going to be in the long run. I'm 100% convinced of this, and I've seen this in the past. Running teams, and also happy with the team that we have onboarded here at TikTok with a diverse experience levels and diversity in thought, confidence to speak up when things are off and something is not right. I think many people think of diverse teams as a nice thing to have. I think it has a huge impact on performance and how a team functions, how people feel when they get up in the morning, walking to the office. I mean, it ticks so many boxes that I can only recommend to be very, very much involved in the hiring process. It's one of the key management tasks that somebody should be successful and become better in. And that helps you with many, difficult potential conversation you don't want to have.
Yeah, again, excuse me, the key words that come up again is the curiosity and the empathy to one is the people you need to change is understanding why, rather than just assuming and really digging in and trying to find that best option. But I've said to a lot of people, you should enjoy your job and life's short. So if you don't, find something that works. So while it feels bad to have conversations about, firing, in most cases, it's probably better for the candidate as well. And the other interesting thing here, I think, of the types of people who'll be watching this, there will be those managers who are in a situation who can recruit for themselves. There'll be maybe owner-operators, which is often really challenging when you're not 100% sure why you were successful, but you were just driven and you found something that worked, and you build a company. And as you start to scale, it's very difficult to not recruit clones of yourself, because you can easily empathize with them. They tell you what you want to hear. But I always look it's interesting, the boss I was talking about before, he tried for many years to get into IBM in the US. It was his dream job. We're going back in the 80s, in the early days, and they had a very rigid employee profile that they wouldn't go outside. And he actually failed the personality test 3 times because he went to 3 different states to try and get in there, but they didn't want his personality. They had a very rigid personality type. We all know what happened to IBM as a computer company. They almost went the way of Kodak. So I think diversity is really important. But the other thing that I thought was important you said to there is understanding who you need and what you need them to bring, because recruiting diverse talent because they're diverse is not the goal. It's recruiting diverse talent that adds something that's missing at the moment. And I think that's something where managers look to hire is not focusing just on skill, thinking about the attributes, the mindset, the experience and how that would be applied in your context. Because as you said, you are a fast-moving new company and you don't necessarily want someone who's been in a stale job, but you could have had someone who worked in a government department for 20 years in a different job, every 3 years in some kind of rotation. How would that fit into your world? And it sounds like you've developed some really interesting recruitment techniques, which is kind of the last topic I'd like to touch on, if that's okay, is if you have any advice about specific techniques managers can use during an interview or an assessment process to identify how that diverse background would fit into your organization, and how you go about confirming, will this personality match, those we've got here?
Yeah. I think during an interview process or during an interview, I mean, the mistakes you may need to avoid is having only one person interviewing, right? So the interviews at the end of the day is so there's a variety of people that interview. The peers interview, I interview, recruiter interviews, and everybody has a specific task in that interview, right? I'm not going to go and have a nitty-gritty technical conversation, as an example, with a client solutions manager, who's probably better at that than me, right? I'm not going to be able to ask the right probing questions to find out, does this candidate actually know this? Yes or no? I, would be able to kind of like have a conversation with that person around, mindset and attitude. What do they do when they are challenged? How have they managed challenging situations, right? And I have to be careful because people kind of like know nowadays how these interview processes go, and then they can come up with a beautiful case that they have solved when they were challenged, and so forth, right? So all these interview techniques are out there to be found on Google, YouTube, TikTok, and so forth, right? You can find it anywhere, right? And you can prep yourself really well for an interview process and go through that process very well. There's people that are very good at interviewing and that they end up not being so good at the tasks themselves, right? So when you interview, you really have to get the candidates so far, you have to get them to a place that he has not prepped for. And how is that person actually managing, I don't want to say cornered because an interview should always be a positive experience, right? So, it shouldn't be set up to make people fail or feel uncomfortable, but it should be set up in a way where you actually really get to know the person, the unprepared person, because business life is unprepared. We don't know what we're doing. When we get up in the morning, we think we know that this is my plan, but you end up doing a lot of other things at the end of the day, right? So, and you end up with challenges that you don't even know about in the morning, and that is how you should prepare for an interview. So, asking follow-up questions is really, really key, right? And you, Zane, you interview people, right? So you do that naturally, and I'm sure that you would do some of these things in an interview process, should you have one, is follow-up questions and go deeper, right? And not just take the story as it has been told, but really stop sometimes and then really try to understand what happened in that situation and what was the reason for this, and then go a little bit deeper. So everybody in an interview process, let's say 4 to 5 people, have a specific task to probe on. And now I know a lot of people do not have the time or don't have the resources or don't have 5 other people to include in an interview process, or think, hey, I know exactly what I need. I don't need anybody else to move in there. But I can only recommend to think about who could potentially be supportive in an interview process. If you don't have 3 staff or 5 staff that you can involve in a process like that, maybe ask a business partner that you trust, that can be potentially a part of that process, not officially, but who could have a conversation with that person and see what their thought about that person is. Now, in a small market like New Zealand, it usually takes a couple of phone calls, right? Everybody seems to know everyone, so it's an easy way of finding out whether somebody is a good fit to a team or maybe not.
I totally agree with the deep dive questioning, and I look for concise answers, including numbers, percentages, times, as opposed to ambiguous terms. Or I look at consistency. When I go back and ask the question again, did they give me a similar answer? And then I like your point about asking something that people are not prepared for. And as in sales related work I've always had over the years as a manager, the first question I'll always ask the candidate is, tell me what you know about me. And see, have they taken the time to do a little bit of research? And it's very hard for me not to, but I'll often be turned off when they actually say, I'm only meeting you for the first time. You've had my name for a week now. Have you used Google before?
I completely agree. I mean, you'd be surprised at you'd be surprised how, yeah, sometimes people are not very well prepared, right? When you ask a product question, right? And you would have a more senior candidate coming in, and they would think, well, I don't have to have a conversation around product, but I mean, there's some basics, right? And some basics about the research of the company, some of the key products that they potentially need to sell at some point, right? And if that doesn't come out right away, right, and with a little bit of confidence, then I agree. It's a similar example of what you just said. Then it really, it's not let's say it's not a good start to the interview. Yeah.
I'll often ask them, people say the whole sell me a pen thing, but I will ask them, choose one of our products and tell me how you would explain the value to a potential customer. And if they haven't actually looked at our core products and can't think of what the value is, it just shows you. And it's not the only way I'll exclude them, but it's generally, to me, is like, do they really want to be here? If they are curious, they will have had an opportunity to look at those things. So that's some great techniques. If I could sum up again what I've heard from you today, you're a very people-focused manager, and I think regardless of the technology or the tools or the products you've got, for the foreseeable future, humans are still the main interface, and you show a genuine curiosity and an empathy towards your team, as I've said a number of times, and they'll feel that. And that's what I would encourage other managers to do, is try to treat your team as people, as you do. And if you can understand, what makes them happy, what motivates them to come to work every day, why they would like to work with you, why they continue to work with you, it's always easier to get them to buy into what you're asking them to do rather than just constantly talking to them. So on numerous occasions, you've shown the curiosity, the questions, and a very practical way of dealing with it. So I thank you so much for your advice.
Can I just add one thing, because
Sure.
when it comes to how do you keep good people, right? So because you kind of like you just mentioned that a little bit. So I think one way of keeping good people, and the biggest compliment I can get from somebody, and recently somebody in my team told me that, is that they have never learned, or that person has never learned as much as she did in the first 6 to 8 months in that company. That is the biggest compliment I can potentially get. And again, I think that is also the biggest impact for somebody to stay in a company for longer, right? So the ability of giving people a chance to evolve and develop, and again become better versions of themselves, working and at the same time investing into their skill sets. I mean, that's potentially the best thing you can do to keep high performers on the team happy, performing over longer periods of time.
And you were right. It's very rarely all about the money. Once you get to a certain level, it's about what you get out of the job, or where you see yourself progressing. So some really good hints there. I'd love to get you back on for another chat at some stage. It's been really interesting. I love the way you're able to tell stories, but they all have a very clear message that I was able to pick up. So I'm hoping the viewers will get that. Both of us,
I hope so too,
are available on LinkedIn. So I'll post some of these on various platforms. But feel free to look us up and come directly with Carsten with your questions, because I'm sure I'd be more than happy to share some insights with you all. So thanks again for joining me today on Layers LCG. I look forward to seeing you next time.
Perfect. Zane, thanks so much. Take good care. Bye-bye.